This webinar series that we're kicking off today is a partnership between our California and Pacific Northwest teams. And it speaks really to the second and third legs of our mission. At AFT, we believe that agriculture has an important role to play in mitigating climate change, but we also know that if we don't consider the economic implications of farm management decisions, we'll never be successful in achieving widespread adoption of climate smart practices. So our goal with this series is to train agricultural service providers on how to help growers assess the economic and environmental impacts of sustainable practices in vineyards. We aim to demonstrate that there can be economic and environmental gains from implementing these practices. For those of you who are attending today who might be farmers yourselves, we hope to inspire and encourage you so that you can do the same for others. Thanks for joining us in this work. And I'm pleased to turn it back to Courtney, who will be managing the logistics for today's event.
Great, thank you, Addie. So as mentioned, I am Courtney Nauman. I'm the Ag Stewardship Program Manager here in the Pacific Northwest. I'll be in the background more today, monitoring the chat for questions, keeping time, and then closing us out today. So it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Lum, who is AFT's agricultural specialist, an expert in case study management, and author of the Grow Profile we'll be hearing about more. I'm going to give a couple introductions to our two speakers, and then I will mention that we are recording today, and you can see that that will be going on this side here. So Paul's background includes experience as an irrigation specialist for Solano Irrigation District and past president of Solano County Farm Bureau. He currently serves the vice president of Solano Resource Conservation District, the secretary of board of directors for the Solano Land Trust, and serves on the Solano Flood Control Advisory Committee. Paul has owned his own farm near Vacaville, California for over 30 years and has experience with a diversity of crops and an intimate knowledge of operational and financial decision-making for farmers. Lastly, he graduated from the University of California, Davis with a degree in plant science and agronomy. Next is Dan Rinke, who is our guest speaker today. Dan's wine growing career began with a Bachelor of Science in Viticulture, minor in plant science from Fresno State University. After school, he worked as the assistant winemaker at Domaine Alfred, followed by a viticulturist at Rise Vineyards. He then took a position as wine grower at Johan Vineyards, an 89-acre certified organic biodynamic dry farmed and minimally tilled vineyard and winery in the Willamette Valley. In 2011, Dan and his wife Kim Hamblin started Art Plus Science, Cider Plus Wine on their property, Rochambeau Art Farm, a 50-acre farm that has hayfields, pastures, an annual music festival, and 15 acres of a mixed culture, no-till, biodynamic, dry farmed regenerative orchard. In 2021, Dan started Art Plus Science Agronomy and consults for vineyards, orchards, wineries, and cideries, looking for help in converting to organic or biodynamic regenerative farming and low intervention wine and cider making. For those of you listening in on this call, please feel free as we are going along to put your questions in the chat as the presentations occur, and we'll be monitoring and integrating. And I am going to set up a poll question here for us so that we can get an understanding of where everyone is coming from today. I'll give folks a couple minutes to insert answers here. Dan and Paul, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it and are looking forward to learning from you today. Paul, let's give this poll, let's see, maybe 1 to 2 minutes, and then I'll close it out and I can kick it off to you. Let the results trickle in here. We have a couple more people joining us as well. So for those of you that just joined in on the call, if you wouldn't mind saying which category or affiliation you best represent here in our poll question, this really helps with our metrics. And then we will get started with Paul in 1 second. Okay. That's great. Paul, will you kick us off for us?
Okay. Thank you, Courtney. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your attendance and participation. The focus of today's talk is assessing the economic impacts from sustainable farming practices. Then on March 18th, we're going to discuss the environmental impacts from sustainable practices and discuss the use of environmental tools developed by USDA and NRCS, such as the nutrient tracking tool and COMET-Planner, to estimate environmental impacts. So here's the agenda today. I'll talk about American Farmland Trust grower profiles in sustainability. And then Dan Rinke will speak about soil ecology and no-till practices. We'll have a 10-minute break at approximately 10 o'clock, maybe a little bit later than that. And then for the final session, I'll cover the T-chart methodology to estimate economic gains or losses from changes in farming practices. So we hope that at the end of the webinar, you'll have a better understanding of how the grower profiles and T-chart training can benefit you and the growers that you work with. This program is supported by the National Department of Food and Agriculture, USDA, through the Western Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program. Goals and purpose. The purpose for our webinars, grower profiles, and training sessions are to increase farmer adoption of sustainable practices, to improve soil health, net income, and to mitigate the effects of climate change. We aim to provide evidence of tangible benefits to healthy soils, demonstrate economic and environmental tools to quantify those benefits, publish easy-to-read handouts that describe a grower's success with soil health improvement, hold educational events, and promote the profiles to growers, the ag community, and the general public. Sustainable wine grape growing, as defined by the Oregon Wine Board, is whole farm management and responsibility, biodiversity, soil health, stability, and fertility, low input pesticide and synthetic fertilizer use, water and energy conservation, worker health, and well-being. I'm going to hide myself. There we go. Soil health. Why quantify the soil health outcomes? There's scientific evidence that farming practices, such as cover crops, nutrient management, minimum tillage management, compost applications, improve soil health and water quality. But there's not much information about the economic benefits, and farmers want to know the bottom line. AFT has published 10 case studies across the US. They're developed and authored by AFT staff, reviewed by economists and specialists from NRCS, USDA, and Colorado State. In California, 2 AFT case studies have been published evaluating almond orchards in Merced County and Madera County. AFT's California region, trying to see if that's gone for you. AFT's California region has completed 3 grower profiles in wine grapes, developed by assessing healthy soils practices, being conservation cover or planted cover crops, nutrient management, compost application, and minimum tillage or no-till. Today, I'll highlight a California grape grower profile, Mark Lyons of Ecotorino Wines in the Sonoma Valley, and I'll summarize a Willamette Valley profile soon to be published. That's Ken Kupperman of Jackson Family Wines. These profiles were written by California staff of AFT. And although the profiles describe vineyard operations, we can write profiles for many different types of crops and farming operations. Here's the front page of the 3-page publication. Each profile consists of 3 elements: the grower's story, the economic findings, and the environmental findings. The story captures the grower's background in vineyard history, their approach to farming and stewardship, and any grower comments about their experiences with the practices they adopted. We quantified economic outcomes with the NRCS Level III T-Chart. The T-Chart allows us to calculate increases in income from changes in farming practices or losses from changes in practices. And I'll talk about the T-Chart later this morning. We quantified environmental benefit with USDA's nutrient tracking tool and USDA's COMET-Planner. Our work is not replicated research, and we don't measure a number of soil parameters, but we do track soil organic matter content. Our aim is to tell the story of a grower's experience with improving soil health, to convey his or her approaches to farming, and using tools to assess benefit to the grower's bottom line and positive impact to water quality and greenhouse emissions. Also, we recognize it takes years to build up soil, and each farmer has different soil types, equipment, budget, and management approaches. So each grower will have different results when adopting sustainable practices. But we hope that our grower profiles raise awareness that soil health can make a positive contribution to net returns and the environment. Our first grape grower profile with Mark Lyons. We interviewed Mark, learned of his winemaking background and about the history of the vineyard. Mark told us about his farming philosophy, which was influenced by his visits to wineries in France, where he observed how growers maintain soil health by producing high quality wines. Based on those visits, Mark began to plant cover crops and minimize tillage. He also told us of the challenges he faced, such as trying different seed mixes and managing cover crop growth and mowing phases throughout the season. The profile lists the practices that Mark adopted since 2013: nutrient management, conservation cover, mulching, compost application, minimum tillage. Mark says, prior to 2013, we were tilling the soil to death. The changes I made to improve the soil are a long-term investment. Here's the first section of the profile on page 1, describing the vineyard on the right side on the sidebar, and the narrative in capturing the grower's story of their approach to farming and their experiences with sustainable practice adoption. On page 2, we included the cost-benefit analysis in the form of a T-chart. So for Ecotorino, the vineyard, we found an increase in net returns from improved soil health and vineyard floor management. We'll discuss the T-chart after our break today. And on page 3, we described the environmental benefits using the nutrient tracking tool and COMET-Planner. And about these tools, we're going to describe at our webinar on the 18th, next Thursday. Here are the home pages for the nutrient tracking tool and COMET-Planner for your reference. For Ecotorino, using these tools, we were able to estimate the following benefits over a 7-year period since 2013. The findings were a 32% reduction in nitrogen losses, a 52% reduction in sediment losses, and carbon sequestration equal to 760 acres of forest per year. So the significance of nitrogen loss reduction means greater nitrogen and nutrient availability to plants and less leaching to groundwater, and reduction in sediment losses, less erosion, and also just overall better soil quality, soil health. We completed a grower profile for Ken Kupperman, who manages the Grand Moraine Wine Estate in Yamhill County, Oregon. He's the Vice President of Operations Oregon for Jackson Family Wines. The profile will be published soon and posted on the AFT website. The vineyard was purchased from a prior owner in 2013, and Ken made changes in farming practices to meet live standards, which documents sustainable practice adoption through third-party certification. He established ecological compensation areas, and since 2013, he reduced tillage and began planting cover crops. So his sustainable practices are cover cropping, annual seeding, and establishing grass vegetation in alternate rows, minimum tillage, nutrient management, low input pesticide use, integrated pest management methods, or IPM, and participation in the Salud program for worker health care support. By implementing practices that improve soil health and vineyard floor management, Ken reports greater soil stabilization, less runoff, improved nutrient availability, better overall soil health, and improved fruit wine quality. So how can ag professionals benefit from the profiles? The profiles can be used to demonstrate examples of grower success with sustainable practices and vineyard floor management, improving soil health. We chose the environmental tools because they are simple and easy to use. And we encourage you and the growers that you work with to try these tools, try different scenarios to see what farming practices might be beneficial and feasible, or what changes might lead to cost increases. Ag professionals can inform the ag community, the general public, the media of soil health benefits from practice adoption and of the tools to quantify those benefits. How can growers benefit from the profiles? Growers can read about a fellow grower's experience with adopting sustainable practices. Growers can learn to use the T-charts, nutrient tracking tool, and COMET-Planner to see what practices might work on their farms. Growers can share the case studies and tools with their landowners and crop buyers to improve communication and explore potential marketing opportunities. In sum, the profile is a grower's story of their experiences and their approach to farming. We apply the Level III T-Chart to determine economic impact, and nutrient tracking tool and COMET-Planner to quantify environmental impacts. So by publishing the profiles, in sum, we hope to demonstrate a grower's success and to train folks on the tools. We are in the process of publishing additional profiles and hope to work with more growers in the future. We're collaborating with other agencies on soil health projects, staying connected with University Extension, crop researchers, nonprofits in ag research or ag outreach in order to further our goals to scale up adoption of sustainable farming practices. And I'm seeking a grower for a new profile. Please contact me if you're interested ASAP. We'd like to push another one out and get that out into the public. Here are grower profile and case study resources that you can refer to, links to the T-chart, nutrient tracking tool, COMET-Planner, and AFT's grower profiles and case studies. Thank you. Thanks for listening about our grower profile work. We can take Q&As now, and afterwards Dan Rinke will speak about vineyard floor management and no-till practices.
Perfect. And for anyone that's on the call now, if you want to put your questions in the chat, we can take a couple minutes and take them. If there aren't questions that come through, I think we'll keep going along, and feel free to put your questions in as the presentation's going. Paul, one question was whether the links can be put into the chat, and I think I can work with you to put that in there.
Great, Courtney, thanks.
Great.
Okay, I see a comment about the NTT link, Carl, and you are correct. I found that yesterday, and so I'll provide Courtney with the correct nutrient tracking tool link. The old link somehow, for some reason, changed.
Great. And Paul, I don't see very many questions coming through here. So if you wanted to keep going, and if people have questions, they can integrate them, and then you could answer them as they come up. Does that sound okay?
That's great. Yeah, while, as we progress through this morning, if you have further questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or contact me later. We'll continue this conversation. Thank you. But now Dan Rinke is up next.
Hi, everyone. I am going to share my screen here. Okay, so I'm the grower profile for today, talking about vineyard soils and soil ecology. I was, since 2007, I was the vineyard manager at Johan Vineyards in Willamette Valley. Johan is a certified biodynamic vineyard. And then as of 2014, we also converted into a no-till system. At that point, we started with just a few blocks. The vineyard's about 89 acres. And we'll just go through the slides here. Whoops. Regenerative viticulture. I just wanted to start off by going through exactly what is meant by regenerative agriculture. And I think if you hit these 5 principles, those cover the main points of regenerative agriculture, although I'm sure there's some arguments for adding others or being a little bit more nuanced than this. But just to start, it's keep the soils covered at all times, minimize soil disturbance, maintain living roots in the ground year-round, maximize the crop diversity, and integrate livestock. So we're going to go through each of these points. I'm going to just go over how we're doing it and then why we would do it for each of these. So keeping the soil covered at all times. We do this through cover crops, wood chip mulches, also known as ramial wood chip piles, which are made up of deciduous trees or deciduous branches, at least 20, more than 80% from deciduous trees. So a little bit can be from pine trees. You want to be careful on putting too much softwoods in those wood chip piles, as they will that first year exude some allelopathic properties to hardwoods, which are grapevines are hardwoods, or dicots. We also do this through leaf mulches, compost, and then I'm pretty adamant about no herbicides and also no under the vine cultivation. So how do you manage the weeds at that point? I know that's a controversial topic, and whether you consider that to be regenerative or not is an argument we probably have at a later time. And then why do we do this? It's mainly build organic matter and slow the carbon cycle down in the soil and put more carbon in the soil. You know, in talking about this, I also want to get on my soapbox real quick and talk about people mention carbon sequestration. I really think it's a horrible idea to consider carbon sequestration, because sequestration is assuming that you're trapping something for perpetuity. And I do not believe that we should stop the carbon cycle. I just think we should slow it down when it's in the soil. And then we want to try to build, another reason is it builds a vast and diverse soil microbiome, prevent soil erosion, which also builds organic matter, prevents compaction, which also builds organic matter. It also, by having the soils covered, you reduce the soil surface temperatures during the hot summer days, and also reduces soil evaporation. And then I'm sure people want to bring up the argument of transpiration, but that's a different discussion. And I also wanted to mention that one of the main things that compacts the soil is rain. And so when you cover your soil with green growing plants, that's how you're preventing erosion or compaction. The next step is to minimize soil disturbance. And then how we're doing this is no-till, going to a no-till system, which means no more annual plow down cover crops, whether it's alternating rows or every rows. It's just stop the cultivation altogether. Instead, let's move to an under the vine mowing situation and an in-row mowing situation, or adding in the addition of livestock for your mowing purposes. Why do we do these? Again, increase organic matter. It stops the breaking up of fungal hyphal networks. Every time you're going and till, you're basically shifting your soil microbiology community towards a bacterial dominated community rather than a fungal dominated community. And if you look at where grapevines came from, their soils tend to be a higher fungally dominated soil matter, soil makeup. And so we want to try to do everything we can to encourage fungal populations to increase. It's also widely known that fungus have a more efficient carbon usage compared to bacteria. And so we're then encouraging a slower use of the microbial community for the organic matter. This also prevents erosion and prevents compaction, which again increases organic matter. As you're going to see, the whole idea of this is to increase organic matter. The next thing is you want to maintain living roots in the ground year round. The living root that we want to maintain is not only the grapevines. The grapevines cover such a small percentage of our vineyard floor that we need the help of cover crops, particularly perennial cover crops, although reseeding annuals are also great. But I want a living root that plant is photosynthesizing year round besides just the grapevines. So I'm looking for things that are going to maintain green throughout the warm, hot, dry end of the season time. So from mid-July on, I want to see some green growing plants out there besides the grapevines. So I'm looking at things like bird's foot trefoil, which is a legume. It's really short, really low to the ground. So it makes an excellent companion in the vineyard. Other things are native grasses, and then some orchard grasses I've also noticed still living on well past July and into August. Why do we want to do this? It's all about the liquid carbon pathway. It's been stated that 20 to 60% of the carbon that's created through photosynthesis is transmitted to the roots as soil exudates. And this is for feeding for the plants to create the symbiosis between soil microorganisms and the plants themselves, where it's an exchange for the plant gives the root exudates to the microbial community, and the microbial community in return will get moisture to the plants, nutrients to the plants, and even plant hormones. Some microbes have the ability to create plant hormones or stimulate plant hormone responses within the plant itself. And the next step is to maximize crop diversity. I do this by having my cover crop species being 12 to 20 different species of perennial or reseeding annual crops. I want plants of all types. I am non-discriminatory. I want shallow rooted plants. I want deep rooted plants. I want native plants, non-native plants, grasses, sedges, broadleaves, legumes, wildflowers. I think the more diversity, the better. And the reason that I want more diversity is that each individual species of plant has its own biomarker that signals microbes, all different kinds of microbes, to exist in that soil profile. And so I want an extreme diversity of soil microbial life. And these plant root exudates bring in different types of microorganisms or feed different microorganisms, and keeps the population as diverse as possible. Another thing I wanted to mention is to maintain a large diversity of cover crops. You're constantly out there every year reseeding with a no-till seed drill and just trying whatever combinations we're observing working the best. And to be completely honest, at this point in time, we're shooting in the dark because there's no research being done on this type of system. So we're trying, and things that we notice fail, we don't try again, and let the system kind of work itself out as it goes. And then the other thing to think about with these root exudates, it's not just simple sugars that's the carbon exudates. They're amino acids, they're organic acids, they're lipids, they're secondary plant metabolites in which the microbial or soil food web uses to bolster their populations, in which, as their populations go up, also helps the entire plant community, even the grapevines. And then the last thing is to integrate livestock. And how do you do this? You can do it with chickens, ducks, sheep, pigs. Ideally, you're rotationally grazing and leaving at least 50 to 40% of the plant as the animals are grazing. And this little chart on the left shows exactly why. If you remove too much of a plant, then the roots stop growing. And to keep in mind, what we want is actively photosynthesizing plants, taking those photosynthates and putting them back into the soil. So if we start killing our roots, they're going to stop putting those root exudates down to the roots. So we don't want to overgraze. That's really important. I think you can try to mimic this in a way if you can't integrate livestock, because I know the difficulty of working with animals, and it adds a whole different dimension to farming grapes. We could try to, when going in and mowing, lift the mower up a little bit higher. And so we're not taking the grasses all the way down to the ground and killing the roots of our cover crops, but we're lifting that mower up a little bit higher. So we're leaving more of the plant behind. And we can also get around some of these other things with nutrient cycling, organic matter, building organic matter, the adding microbial diversity by either using compost teas, judicious additions of plant nutrients as the plants show that they need it, ideally through tissue sampling or plant sample analyses, putting organic matter out there or things that replicate the manure or urine that the animals would be putting out there through composting. But if we go back to having the livestock there, those livestock are doing our mowing for us. And they do a little bit of minimal ground disturbance, which sometimes just helps encourage the ecology of the cover crops. You know, just opening the soil a little bit so a seed can land down naturally and reseed itself, and then your cover crops are also managing themselves. But why are we so focused on organic matter? Well, first of all, what is organic matter? Organic matter is plant residues and the living microbial soil, living microbial biomass in the soil food web. That's like about 5% of organic matter. And then the other part is the active part of soil organic matter, which is about 45%. And then the really extreme stable part of organic matter is the humus. And that's the other 47.5%. So why is soil organic matter so important? It increases water holding capacities as our summers get hotter and drier. As we have more cover crops in the soil, we're having more transpiration. We need more water holding capacity. They offer higher water infiltration. So when we get our winter rains, the water's not running off the top of our soils, but soaking deep down into our soil profile, and we're keeping it until later in the growing season when we're going to need it. Lowers compaction, lowers erosion. It has higher stability of soil aggregates. The soil aggregates are also made by those carbon root exudates. We have more oxygen diffusion, a higher CEC, higher AEC, higher chelation of micronutrients. So all those are about maintaining and making nutrients more plant available. And then higher soil organic matter also helps buffer soil pH. So I just wanted to go over why we don't want to till. And I really found that this was a great way to think of it. When you're tilling, you're increasing the oxygen in the soil. And what that does is it's like a wood stove. As you open up the flue for a wood stove, the wood starts burning faster, hotter and faster. Where if you close down that flue a little bit, it slows down the oxygen from getting into the wood, and it burns slower and longer. And you're essentially conserving your energy source. And our soil organic matter is basically that wood in that stove. And we're just trying to conserve that soil organic matter to last over longer amounts of time, so we can also increase it at the same time. So I just wanted to go into a little study I did last summer in conjunction with Biome Makers. They had this initiative called Fields Forever Initiative. Biomakers is a high-tech company that basically integrated RNA analysis with a very large database. The database is made up of soil species that are that have been mentioned in scientific papers, and they're what those scientific papers have proven those soil microorganisms to do, or what the associations with multiple different soil microorganisms would do. And so basically what you do is you take a soil test, you send it into their lab, they run it for DNA, and they tell you what species are in your soil. And they also then run that through their database and come up with a few conclusions of what those soil microorganisms are doing in your soil. I did this study where I took soils from, can you guys see my mouse pointer? This is block 1. So I took soil samples from 3 different soil samples at random from block 1, one at the top of the block, one in the middle, and then one at the very bottom. And this is Pinot Noir 667. This is the block that's been longest in no-till farming at Johan. So I started that in 2014, did no-till farming in 2014 on block 1, block 2, block 4, and block 5. And then, and at that time, our neighbors had a long-term lease of this block here, which is block 9. And that was conventionally farmed, tilled every other row. And we took over control of that in 2019. 2019, we tilled it in the spring of 2019. In the fall of 2019, planted an annual plow down cover crop in the fall of 2019. And then the spring of 2020, we tilled in that annual plow down cover crop. And the summer of 2020, so it was in June of 2020 that I pulled the soil samples. It was both of the blocks, block 9 and block 1, were Pinot Noir and 667 on 10114 rootstock. Both blocks were planted in 2002, and we took 3 samples from each of the blocks, kind of at a planned out random method. The results of it was that the no-till versus tilled microbial study, the no-till had a higher biodiversity. No-till had a higher abundance of biocontrol organisms. No-till also showed, well, we assumed that the no-till had lower organic carbon losses through aerobic respiration because of the fact that it had a higher fungal to bacterial ratio, and the fungi have a higher carbon use efficiency. We also found that the no-till had a higher amount of AM fungi and trichoderma species. It showed that the uniqueness, which was the organisms that were found in each sample, but not in the other sample. So the no-till had 359 organisms. The tilled had 181 organisms. So almost double the amount of organisms that were unique. And then the uniqueness strength, which is that these organisms were in all 3 of the samples from one treatment. And so there was 23 different ones than the 8 different ones in the tilled, which is almost 3 times as high. And then just a diversity, this is just the straight up microorganisms that were in the sample. There were 1,017 different organisms in the no-till and 839 different organisms in the tilled. And then the affinity is common microorganisms, microorganisms that basically work together or work on the same areas on their function in the soil. And we had 402 and 384. Other observations that I've made since moving to no-till, block 1, which is the longest no-till block at Johann. In 2007, I have a soil analysis that stated it having a pH of 5.1. And then I want to note in 2008, I did lime that block, but it was about 1 ton per acre. And so we went back in 2011 and checked the soils again, and it was 5.4 was the pH. So it went up a little bit, probably due to the lime. And then after 2011, I did add some dolomite. But the next time I tested it after adding that dolomite in 2011, fall of 2011, was that next time I tested was 2017, and it was 6.7. But at that time in 2014 is when I went no-till. So I don't think that the amount of dolomite lime that I put in would have raised the pH that far. And you know, one of these, we're a little bit opposite of California, where we're trying to get our pHs up in our soils here in the Willamette Valley, instead of in California where they're already high. The other thing I noticed is that the acidity of our wines, the pHs of our wines, tended to go down over time as the longer and longer that we've been no-till. But that's a simple observation, and it's real hard to prove given the different growing seasons that we've had each year. The other thing that I've noticed since 2014 when we went no-till is that I see tons and tons of mushrooms growing all over the place. These are in vines and on prunings, but then in the soil, and we have multiple different species of mushrooms, as you can see. Another thing to think of, that there's hundreds of kilometers of mycelium in 1 footstep. And every time you till, you break up those mycelium, and basically that goes away. So it's just something to think about next time you go to till your soils. And then, as you can see, more and more different species of fungus growing in the vineyards. So as you can see, heaven is under our feet as well as it's over our head. That's all I have to add to my presentation. And we can take questions if there are questions.
Great, Dan, it does look like there's a couple of questions. I'll start with this first one. There are some for Paul, so we're gonna put a pin in those until he speaks again. But the first is, how are you quantifying the fungal, bacterial, and other organism populations? Do commercial ag soil labs measure these parameters?
Yeah, so there's several different ones that do. Biomakers, which is the lab that I use, strictly detects the presence and absence of a species. So whether a species is there or not. There's another lab, several different labs that are related to Elaine Ingham's Soil Food Web. Here in Oregon, there's Earth Fort in Corvallis, and they'll give you ratios of fungal to bacterial. There's also Woods Ends in Maine that does it also, and I'm sure there's a few other labs throughout the country.
Great. The second question here is, did you see any impacts on the vine growth, such as pruning weights with the no-till?
I have that data and I could look at it, but I didn't see extreme differences. The no-till had been farmed conventionally for 15 years before I gained control of it. I only gained control of it in 2019. So its fertilization is also much different than my fertilization programs, meaning that they use a lot more nitrogen than what I did. But I have that information and I can share that with anybody that wants it.
Great. Looks like those are the only two questions that we have here, so we can transition back to Paul too if you'd like, or if other people have questions as they come in, we can integrate them in and ask Dan again. Thank you so much.
Shall I jump in on these questions, or Courtney, do you want to tell me what they are? But I could read them in the chat.
Yeah, why don't I read them for folks who might join us later or watch this recording.
Okay.
The first question for you is, how long do the grower profiles take?
Well, it is going to be somewhat dependent on how much farming input information the grower has at their disposal, because in addition to the narrative story, we're going to ask questions about their inputs. For instance, if it's fertilizers, how many pounds they apply per acre, what type. And we're looking for a transition from a more of a non-sustainable practice management to converting to more sustainable. So, and that provides the economic and environmental assessment that through one scenario transition to another, the changes, there's an economic change. And so another example would be tillage. If the grower was doing intensive tillage, tilling 3 times per season, and through sustainable practices, reduced to 1 time or went to 0. So those are examples of the inputs we want. We want a description of what changes were made and what the costs were. And for instance, cover crops, we're going to want to know, the seed mix and the number of pounds planted. And so that, given that the grower that participates with us has that scenario, a transition, I'm going to say on the average about a full day, basically a couple interviews and time to gather data, time to approve the profile that we write, providing pictures. There's usually a little bit of going back and forth, clarifying some of the information. So if the grower has all the data at their disposal, perhaps 3/4 of a day. But in some cases, when you add all the emails and phone calls, it's about 1 day. And I saw the question about, yes, the grower certainly reviews the profile before it goes out. And I encourage you to look at the link and read some of the other profiles we wrote. So we've written 2 that are published in California Wine Grape Growers. Read those. And we wrote a profile on an almond grower. And then AFT wrote a couple grower profiles, case studies, which are a little bit different, a little more comprehensive. So I would encourage you to read those. That's the format that we're using now. And, we hope to, I need to write one more at this period, this month. So I'm seeking a grower. And then we hope to do more in the future. And so those future ones may or may not have some compensation, but right now we're not providing a stipend or any type of compensation. But our growers have been, the ones we've written profiles for have been really supportive, and look at it as a way of a marketing opportunity, perhaps, and a way to share their story and their passion for sustainability with other folks.
Great. And Paul, there weren't any more questions. I think you answered those three, so you can move on to your next section.
Okay. Looks like I lost my PowerPoint. Just a minute. Okay, it is actually time for a break. So I almost forgot, we can take 10 minutes. And when we come back, I'll start the last presentation. So 10 minutes after 10, we'll resume. Thank you. Hello, I'll get started again. A few other questions came in about our grower profiles. And in addition to the time that it takes, probably the most time consuming is getting the response back from the growers. So we highly recommend that growers respond quickly. I know everyone's busy, and I know in California, growers are starting to get busy in their vineyards. But that's key for us, is just the a continual effort to return the questions and emails and push it a little bit. As far as using the tools that we describe, the T-Chart, and then later we're going to describe the NTT and COMET-Planner. All three tools are really straightforward. No technical expertise required. And of course, us at AFT could provide some guidance. And also the NRCS folks could help with all three of those tools. So through those links that are resources, videos, and contact folks. But if you need some help, let me know, and I could point you in the right direction, or perhaps provide some guidance. And another question about the economic studies. What are some of the economic trends we've noticed in vineyard systems? And what we are seeing through the case, profiles that we've completed are kind of in concert with vineyard floor management and the growers' efforts with vine management, canopy management, for instance, intensive shoot positioning, cluster thinning, those types of things. Growers have told me that when they do intensive canopy and vine management to improve fruit quality and wine quality, fruit wine quality profiles, and it's in a synergistic way with vineyard floor management, which is directly tied to soil health. They are producing higher quality wines, ultra premium, and they have opportunities to improve price points, higher sales. So it's a little bit intangible, but it's basically the reporting from all the growers we've worked with are highly supportive of soil health and sustainable practices as part of vineyard floor management and as part as wine grape growing in general. Let's see, there's what is the experience of farmers participating in these farmer profiles? Their experiences are positive, and just like Dan said, there's just a lot of benefit to soil health and the environment. And then on the 18th, we're going to talk a little bit about carbon sequestration, quantification, reducing greenhouse gases, and mitigating effects of climate change. So I'm going to start the final session. There we go. I'm gone. I'll start here. So welcome back from our break. We're now going to talk about a method we can use to assess the economic impacts from changing crop practices and inputs. But we hope this instruction will help you learn how to use a basic tool for estimating changes to farming inputs and yields and higher value in your product, and ultimately be able to share this information with growers and the ag community. We're going to focus on the NRCS Level III T-Chart, which is a cost-benefit analysis used to compare two options or two scenarios. In our case, we're comparing farming costs related to changes in practices. It's a simple and basic method for growers to use to determine whether a practice could be feasible. You can estimate benefits and costs from changes in operations, and it focuses only on the variables affected by the change. It compares cost benefits between the before and after scenario, or between the current scenario and a future predictive scenario. So an example could be comparing the cost increase for a new cover crop planting of $100 per acre, or the cost decrease of $50 an acre due to reduced herbicide use as a result of cover crop suppression of weeds. So NRCS published a document, Economic Technical Note, and it's the basic economic analysis using T-charts. It's available online, and it describes a T-chart method for NRCS conservation practices, but the method could apply to any farm practice changes. We're presenting this method to increase awareness of the tool and encourage using it when assisting growers with decision making and planning. So here's page 1 of the publication. There are 3 T-chart levels, and I'm going to walk you through each of the charts. There's level 1, level 2, and level 3. The level 3 is the most effective T-chart for estimating costs or income, but I'm going to describe each one and then focus on level 3. The T-chart methodology is based on partial budgeting, which is the accounting of cost changes from a baseline or past period compared to the current period. An example, again, comparing herbicide and mowing costs, and the value of the T-chart is to assist growers with estimating economic effects of changes in inputs, identifying monetary benefits, and identifying negative inputs and costs due to changes in practices. The economic analysis requires the grower or the person that's using the tool requires 4 steps: estimating costs, estimating the benefits, converting to like terms, such as the cost per acre of all inputs, and comparing the cost and benefits. So this method assesses inputs and benefits related to the specific field or block or vineyard being studied. In contrast, a large equipment purchased like a tractor or irrigation systems used across the entire farm would not be evaluated. But the purchase of a cover crop seeder for the specific vineyard might be applicable. And for large purchases, we use annualized cost accounting. So for instance, a 10-year annualized cost for a tractor. Here's the basic T-chart table. Positive effects entered on the left, negative effects entered on the right column. Positive effects refers to cost reductions of practices or of income increases due to, for instance, price points as a result of sustainable practices. Negative effects on the right might include cost increases from practices or income losses due to, for example, lower fruit quality and hopefully not lower prices, but that's where this would be entered in that column. So the net effect is simply a subtraction of the right column from the left column. The level 1 T-chart, the most basic one, this example, which you probably can't read the lines, but it's from a winter wheat and barley rotation. And so this is the example that NRCS provides. It's a qualitative analysis using statements from the grower for each practice change. So in this table, for positive effects, the grower states a decrease in fertilizer applied. For negative effects, the grower states an increase in cost due to the purchase of a no-till drill. The level 1 chart is a summary of conservation practices. It's less time consuming, and it can be useful to see the number of tasks involved in growing that crop, the types of practices, and its general benefits or detriment. But it does not provide quantitative findings A wine grape grower might list the number of pruning or leaf pulling passes, but not the cost for labor, or list the number of sulfur sprays, but not the cost for it. So this is a way to see an overview of the practices required to grow the crop. The Level 2 chart includes quantitative values for each input and for revenue. However, the values might be entered in unlike terms. So an example might be entering tillage in dollars per acre, but fertilizer application in pounds per acre. So this chart has more information than the Level 1 chart, but it doesn't provide a finding, a result for net benefit or loss. And here's the Level 3 T-Chart, including the crop inputs and revenue. And I realize you can't read the line by line, but it's still based on the barley and grain farm. This chart is more time consuming to complete. It's much more comprehensive, but it provides a net benefit or net loss value. The Level 3 T-Chart is a much better planning tool for considering changes in practices. The premise of the partial budget analysis using the T-chart is to compare inputs and yield from the years or year before practice adoption with the current year or years. So for the sake of accuracy, it might be necessary to use an average of the before scenario years and the average of the after years. This would account for costs, fluctuation, or price point fluctuation due to the weather, other annual variables. And then adjustment for inflation or market fluctuation would be necessary. So this slide shows an example of inputs that might be listed in a Level 3 T-chart in wine grapes. Fertilizer, herbicide, fungicide, miticide, tillage, compost, cover crops, revenue due to price points, and any other impacts. So you can play around with the numbers and see the results from increasing inputs or decreasing inputs. So for example, you can enter $50 an acre, tillage cost reduction, transitioning to no-till or minimum till. Or you could enter $40 per acre, make that estimation and compare the bottom line. So another example is predicting the cost increase from different tough cover crop seed mixes. But my point is we're encouraging you to use the T-chart to determine the impacts from specific changes and in sustainable practices that we're discussing today. Here's an assessment of Ecoterreno's vineyard using the T-chart method. So although you can't see the line item values, this is a good farm example because they made many changes in inputs as they adopted sustainable practices. Growers that participate in NRCS programs often complete this table to help with decision-making and planning and for participating in NRCS programs. But for the sake of today, we're presenting the method as a way to assess cost and benefit. And shown in the upper right are the resource concerns and baseline management practices. On the left are conservation practices that were adopted. At the very bottom shows the positive effects and negative effects on each column. And the last row, the resulting negative the net benefit result or loss in dollars per acre. So here's an expanded view that is, you can read the row. This is the positive effects left column, and the grower reduced nitrogen application. An example, they entered cost reduction due to changes from UN32 and CAN 17 to ammonium thiosulfate with microbial formulations and reduced UN32 in the blend. So the inputs are going to be different for every grower, and we're not advocating any specific practice, and we're not associating any costs with a specific practice. We're training folks on the tool to assess benefit or loss from practice change. Here are resources available with information on production cost studies, NRCS conservation practices, and feel free to contact me. If, when you're working on a T-chart, I could provide some guidance or point you in the right direction. Our next webinar is March 18th, next Thursday. We're going to cover the environmental tools related to water quality, soil health, and climate impacts. And Dr. Patty Skinkus will speak about cover crops and vineyard floor management and its relation to vine management and fruit quality. So this concludes our webinar today. Thanks for sitting in. To recap today, we introduced the grower profiles. We heard from Dan Rinke about soil ecology and no-till. And then we just discussed the economic impact, a method to evaluate that using the T-chart. So we hope you're able to take home some of the information and pass it on to growers as a way to encourage others to try a practice that improves soil health, ultimately sequesters carbon. I am available for further questions, and later we're going to send links to the profiles, the webinar recording, and an exit survey. I want to thank Dan for his very informative talk and for his participation with our webinar, and thank all of you for your participation. So we can now address any other Q&As.
Great, Paul. And there are a couple questions here that I will pose to you, and I will also close us out. I have a couple of closing messages here. I'm going to put our survey that we would love folks to fill out here in the chat, but the two questions that came through the chat are, what are the biggest challenges that you've had in going through the level 2 T-charts with growers? Level 3 T-charts with growers.
I'm going to say the guesstimation of inputs and costs, and it's a best guesstimate. When a grower reduces a tillage operation and has to consider labor and equipment and time, that's a guesstimate. And so, and we all realize that these are ultimately it's an estimate. The assessment is an estimate, but it does capture the changes. But the challenge is the accuracy of the data that we input.
Great. And someone asked for the link to the profiles, so I put that in the chat. It is on American Farmland Trust webpage, and a simple Google search of economic case studies soil health will also bring you there. And
Courtney, make sure that link is the includes the CA, the California profiles. Right.
Great. Yeah, we'll be sending out resources in a follow-up email as well for everyone. Are there any other last questions for either presenter? Give a minute for that.
Courtney, I see some to Dan.
Yes, and it looks like he answered those in the chat. So one question to Dan said, what are the differences in powdery mildew prevention program that he's had between permanent sod and tilled row systems of growing, if any? And Dan responded saying he didn't change his powdery mildew program, but did focus on a few sulfur applications and relied on biologicals to reduce harm done to soil and canopy fungal and bacterial endophytes. Patty asked, does the NRCS work with farmers directly in the T-charts?
They do for farmers participating in, for instance, an EQIP program. But being that they're the the consulting and advisory arm for farmers and their practices, I think they will provide assistance.
Great.
I just wanted to add to that, Patty. Marie, who works at Soil and Water Conservation District in Yamhill County, is working pretty heavily with that, and she's kind of crossing over from Soil and Water Conservation District to doing some NRCS stuff, as they both do in our county. So if you contact Marie at Yamhill Soil and Water Conservation District, she might be able to help you out.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, Paul wrapped us up pretty well there. I have two last things before we officially get off the call here. The first is that AFT has been doing a lot of work in the economic case study space. Also in Oregon, there is activity around this idea, and I wanted to highlight the Oregon Climate Action Network's upcoming work, which is very relevant to ours if folks are interested in this and want to learn more. They will be hosting a farm planning for climate resilience, an Oregon Train the Trainer program in the summer and fall of 2021. This training will advance the knowledge of farm-based solutions for climate resiliency and create a community of practice in Oregon designed to support grower transition, practices that test for carbon and work for the farmer's bottom line. People who are interested in learning more can contact Ashley Rood, and there is contact information here that I'm posting in the chat for everyone. And then lastly, as Paul mentioned, there's a recording of this event that will be published on AFT's YouTube channel for future reference, and we encourage people to share that with their networks if someone wasn't able to attend today and you think that they would find this interesting. We'll be following up with resources and that link via an email. And we'd love for you to attend our second webinar, again, March 18th, this same time, 9 to 11 a.m. Pacific, March 18th next week. The link is in the chat to register, which I will drop now. And oh, hopefully that, let's see if that works. Nope. Okay, I will send out the link via email, but I'm sure folks have gotten it before. And if you would fill out our survey, we would really appreciate it. Paul, I will give the last closing sentence over to you if you'd like to close us out. And it looks like you're muted.
Thanks, Courtney. You did a great job with the closing. I encourage you to send out our announcements for the webinar on the 18th. Send that out to your networks. And I'm continuing to reach out to farmers to notify them of our upcoming webinar as well. Thank you very much.